The Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, has received a report from a retired engineer who claims to have interviewed a welder who cut open the flying saucer that reportedly crashed in the New Mexico desert, just outside Roswell, more than 69 years ago. In a detailed report, the engineer, who has not been named, claimed to have carried out the interview in 1970, 23 years after the legendary event. Roswell has been at the heart of the UFO scene since the military announced in a press release it had found the remains of a crashed flying saucer in the nearby desert, in July 1947. But the following day it retracted the statement, saying it was in fact a damaged U.S. Air Force air balloon. Witnesses later came forward to say there had been alien bodies within the crashed craft, which along with the wreckage were then taken to the mysterious top-secret Area 51 military base in Nevada. In the shock report to MUFON, the former engineer first explained why the interview came about. He said, "I joined the staff of the then new campus of the University of California at Santa Cruz. There were several sightings of UFOs in the mountains behind the campus in 1969 and reported to the university. I was asked to interview 3 people and file a report. I could find no credibility or evidence in these events, but, because it was a small campus and everybody in the science knew what was going on, I got the unwanted reputation of someone who knew about UFOs." The engineers claim this led him to be introduced to the welder who had reportedly been employed in the U.S. Air Force at the Roswell base at the time of the crash. He said, "The individual I interviewed was a welder by trade and after the war was employed at the Roswell Air Force Base welding jigs and fixtures for servicing aircraft." He said the welder revealed how he was told to load a cutting torch for a trip to the desert when they arrived at the crash site.
The engineer said in the report, he, the welder, said they had a flatbed truck loaded with wreckage and there were soldiers on their hands and knees picking up every piece of wreckage and putting it in cloth bags. He said they drove a little farther out of sight from the wreckage and came upon a second group of people standing around an intact UFO. He said the brush was knocked down, indicating the craft had skidded across the ground and came to rest nosed into a natural berm with the backside slightly off the ground. He described the craft as being about 25-26 feet in diameter with a large dome on top. He said the craft was the color of Wheat with a burnished finish. He said there were no signs of weld marks, seams, or rivets and that all of the edges had either an inside or outside radius. There were no visible windows or openings. The welder described being told to cut an opening in the dome big enough for a man to crawl through. The report said he began cutting a hole from the base of the dome. It read, he said it was a tough alloy and slow cutting but the material was surprisingly thin. He tried bending the metal out of his way as he was cutting but the metal would spring back to its original shape without creasing. This mirrors separate claims made during an interview earlier this year when a woman alleged to have handled material which came from the flying saucer which could not be cut or burnt and recovered its shape if crumpled when aged 10 in 1957. The report went on, he finished his cut and set the metal piece aside and looked into the cockpit for a few seconds before he was ordered off the craft. He said it was difficult to see very far into the craft because of the glare from the portable lights and the cockpit was full of smoke from the cutting torch. He said he saw 2 beings who appeared to be dead. He said the cockpit had a strong smell of ammonia. He described the 2 beings as being about 4 feet tall, but they were doubled up so it was hard to say. They were wearing what he said were skin-tight purplish flight suits that reminded him of sequins. He described their heads as what we now refer to as grays. He said there were no visible instruments that he could see. The welder allegedly revealed he was warned to keep silent after returning to base. The engineer's report read, he said it was dark when they arrived and he was escorted by armed guards into a building for a debriefing.